Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Retail transformation maven Oliver Banks is back on the podcast live from the UK, discussing his new book, Driving Retail Transformation: How to Navigate Disruption and Change. Using a clever set of automotive metaphors, Oliver takes us through his retail transformation steering wheel toolkit and to a better place in our journey to become a high-performing retailer. Let's listen in now. Oliver Banks, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast, my friend. Or welcome back, I should say. How the heck are you?
Hey, Michael. Well, it's fantastic to be back. Thank you so much. I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm great. Better for being able to talk to you. It's been a minute since you and I have been on the mic together. It's been too long. A lot has happened in retail, and a lot's happened in your life. You got an exciting new book we're going to talk about, and we should probably both give a shout out to Rethink Retail. We used to be influencers, and now we're experts. So I guess we got promoted, I think, is what happened there.
Indeed. We stopped shouting and started using our brains, it feels like.
I guess so. So anyway, so listen, for those listeners of mine that may have not heard our first conversation, which is, probably now almost 18 months, so maybe even 2 years ago, give us a sense of who you are and what you do for a living.
Sure. So I'm a retail transformation specialist. I'm a consultant, and I work with senior leaders to help transform retail businesses and operating models. I'm a fellow podcast host, and it was wonderful to have you onto my show equally a long time ago, which we should probably resolve soon, Michael.
Yeah.
So it's called the Retail Transformation Show. I'm a LinkedIn top voice for retail and general all-round retail transformation nerd, I suppose you could say, and an author.
And I guess just judging by your accent, you're from South Carolina, I would say. Are you living in
Bingo.
Where am I finding you? Where am I finding you today?
From just outside of London in England.
Well, there's a bunch of stuff I do want to talk about. I can't have you on the mic without talking about how retail is going in the UK. I think we talked about that a little bit. So I'll get to that. But first and foremost, you've got a new book. Congratulations. I barely have time to read books, let alone write them. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Tell us about a little bit about the book, and then we'll kind of peel back and tell us about the book, the title, and then, what got into your head to write a book, and who did you write it for?
Sure. So, thank you. The book is called Driving Retail Transformation: How to Navigate Disruption and Change. And really, it's a recognition that, in the retail industry, there is disruption going on everywhere. There's all these shifts and evolutions happening all of the time, and we need to evolve and change and transform. But it's definitely one of those areas where saying it is a lot easier than doing it. And despite all of that, we talk all the time about the what of transformation. We're talking about omni-channel this and AI that and everything. Yeah. But realistically, we don't ever talk that much about the how of change. How do we actually transform? And I suppose this book was my answer to that. It's the how of transformation. So it's thinking about how do you understand the problems or the challenges or the opportunities that your organization faces? How do you define the appropriate solution that makes sense? How do you manage your own mindset, and how do you lead the change across the company? And ultimately, how do you make progress and deliver and implement an excellent change that improves your organization and hopefully the world for the better?
So I'm gonna inflict upon you and the listeners a pun. It's called Driving Retail Transformation. Can we see it as a roadmap? When you started to put pen to paper or fingers to keys, is that what you were thinking? Like, I need to put together a roadmap and structure a book in such a way that people can follow it and kind of get their heads around these big, as you said, we all understand there's big things happening, but how do I take it into my workplace or my life and actually make that change and transform?
So I'm glad you picked up on the puns, because the driving metaphor flows through the entire book. And, I call it the journey of change, right? So, and I draw lots of comparisons to going on a physical car journey, right? Everything from looking in the mirror through to a steering wheel, through to roadblocks and everything. So I have a bit of fun, but it works really well, actually. And there's lots of comparisons to going on a journey of transformation versus a literal journey that I believe we can learn from, and it helps us to understand what it is we're doing and why.
And was this book a culmination of all your experiences in consulting work and great work that you do that's just been kind of building up and saying, I'm gonna just do a big data dump. I'm just gonna basically, I'm just gonna everything I've been saying, everything I've been hearing for my whole career, I'm just gonna articulate in the book. Was the book there ready for you to write, or did you have to work and start to put some new models together to frame it up in the way that you wanted for the book?
So I have certainly played my time with Post-it notes literally all over my office and the house and everything. So I've certainly done my data dumping, but actually, it needed a huge amount of processing to work out, well, actually, what are the patterns? What are the relevances? I spent, it was actually really wonderful, Michael. The opportunity to reflect has been enormously valuable for me. We reflect and we do lessons learned and stuff at work. And that's great, but it's very much on the short-term reflection, usually. So for me, what the book did was this opportunity to step back and really think, much more expansively about reflection and think, well, here is this change over here in my experience, and that worked really well. And yet here is this other change, which looks and feels fairly similar, but it didn't. It stuttered, it stumbled, it stalled, to use a driving pun. What was the difference, and why did those two, in a very basic example, why did they differ? And it really allowed me to step back and soak all of that in, and absolutely have developed new models. There are models that I've been using for many, many years, and there are patterns and opportunities that I suppose have come out as part of that reflection. So a mix of the two, if you will.
Interesting. And who should read your book? When you're writing it, did you have someone in mind? Is this a book for C-level executives, mid-level executives, people just starting out? The answer could be yes.
Well, it's for retail leaders, and I'm going to expand on that because in the retail industry, we have so many brilliant, genuinely fantastic experts in their field, supply chain gurus, creative product designers, you name it. We've got people that know everything about everything for that area, and they work within our retail organizations, and ultimately they do fantastic work. But the challenge is, Michael, is those individuals, whilst being functionally brilliant at what it is they are doing, they're not also change and transformation professionals at the same time. Yeah.
Is that we might describe that here in North America as, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail syndrome kind of thing.
Yeah, to some extent, but you can't be the hammer that can also screw in the screw, to your point, and also measure if the shelf is straight. So you can't be all things to all people. So I suppose the book is there for those functional experts that need to change and need to lead change, but they're not necessarily experienced in that world of change and transformation. And I use the term leader because it doesn't need to be someone with, chief someone officer as their job title, right? They don't need to be in the C-suite or high up in the organization. They can be someone that wants to take responsibility for driving their organization forwards. They, early on in the book, actually, Michael, I ask the reader if they want to be a passenger or the driver. And this is absolutely the book for those that want to be the driver.
Now, I often ask this question of authors like yourself. The shelves are pretty crowded. with books on every kind of subject in business, including transformation. Where did you see a gap when you sat back as a good consultant that you are and say, I think there's a gap, there's an opportunity? What gap was that? Was it in the structure of the book or the approach? Talk about that and your thinking there.
Yeah, so it's for me, it's transformation. We talk about it all the time, and arguably it is an overused word, right? But for all of that, many of us don't have books on it, yet perhaps we do it all day long, which is quite a peculiar place, really. And I believe many of the change and transformation books up to now have been sort of steeped in, how shall we call it, almost project management over bureaucracy, right? In terms of, very, very detailed, and there's lots of discussion around project management versus change management, just to put it out there as well, which are different things. But I think people, general people don't have that intricacy in terms of that. What is project management versus change management? I don't see a difference because I'm, as I was saying, a supply chain expert, and I've got to transform my organization in this way. I don't need to get into the intricacies of all of that. I just need to be able to make it happen. And I suppose the gap in the market is actually, how do you have a pragmatic guide to help people understand very simply when, you're likely to be doing a million different things all at once, not exclusively focused on a transformation, right? Lots of day job stuff still to do. How do you go about this in a simple, lightweight, but effective way that works in real life?
Let's get into the nuts and bolts, sort of. See, I'm coming along with your theme here. Let's get into the nuts and bolts, the gears, the transmission of the book. The retail transformation steering wheel is a central tool in the framework. Elaborate on how you develop that and how it aids in the navigating the complex transformation journey.
It's a really interesting area because it was one of the areas that I realized early on. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, what gets measured gets managed. Yeah? Yeah. You've probably also heard the phrase, you measure what matters. Yeah?
Right.
And hopefully transformation matters, and hopefully, therefore, you would want it managed. But actually, do we measure transformation? Was this big question? Mm-hmm. And we might say, oh, well, yeah, of course we measure transformation. I can show you the sales uplift or, the cost saving or the conversion boost. True. And those are the outputs of the transformation. And you say, oh, okay, well, maybe, I'm being agile and I'm looking at bug fix rates and, maybe I'm measuring velocity. And that's also true. That's good. And pulling back on the metaphor, when you're driving a car, you can't drive purely reading the velocity. You can't drive purely on the speed, right? You would very quickly have a crash. And so I realized, actually, how do we measure?
Except in Germany, by the way. Germany, actually, they just press the gas pedal and just go. So anyway, there's some exceptions to every rule.
Indeed. But, how do we measure transformation was this big question in a really wholesome way. There's so many different elements to what makes successful transformation. So how do we measure that? And therefore, how do we manage it? So that was the whole idea around the retail transformation steering wheel. It's there to act as a guide. And just like you're driving a car, you don't wait until, driving in a straight line, you don't wait until you've veered into the ditch before taking some remedial action. What you do is you're continually tweaking, steering left and right, braking a little, accelerating a little. And that's what I want the steering wheel to act as for someone embarking on transformation. It's a way of guiding you. It allows you to make small tweaks rather than waiting for the transformation to proverbially veer into the ditch and have this great big, oh my goodness, everything's out of control, all hands to the pump. I'm sure we can all reflect.
Or down the wrong side road. Like if you take a fork on the road, take it, and you've taken the wrong fork.
Exactly.
I mean, both things can be true,
exactly.
Right?
These metaphor keeps on giving, you see, Michael.
Oh my goodness. You're going to regret starting me on this, by the way.
Keep it coming, man.
Keep it coming. So, you referred to something that's interesting. I wanted to chase it down a little bit. So there's very, very few people who will be listening to this podcast whose role says transformation.
Yeah.
Like there's very few individual leaders. I mean, in very large enterprises, you might have an executive whose role is transformation or leading transformation. So it's really a component or part of many people's job. And retail moves pretty fast. That's it's often said now, but it's very true that each individual listening to this, they've got their own transformation, but they've also got a day job, so to speak.
100%.
And how do you balance? How do you suggest leaders balance the need for immediate change with the vision for long-term transformation? Because you're always, you'd love everybody who's listening to this would love to be thinking farther out and stare out the window for a while. And so we understand that everybody has a day job, so to speak, but transformation is vitally important. How do you balance those two?
Well, I think that's it, right? Balance is the key word. And just like a work-life balance, it's about give and take, right? Let's say you can't just focus on your day job all the time. And it's very, very easy to ignore the transformation. But actually, what's going to happen then is, as an organization, you're going to age and you're going to become unrelevant. And it's going to throw up all sorts of future business problems. And then suddenly the business will need to change urgently and drastically. And everything gets out of control. Then
you're in a crisis.
Yeah.
Then you got a big problem, right?
Exactly. But equally, you couldn't flip it the other way and say, I'm just going to focus on, as you say, big picture thinking and focusing in on the transformation, because actually the day job then gets massively out of control. And actually suddenly turns out you're in a storm once again. So it's about how do you balance both at once, and how do you, probably keep all of the plates spinning. And that's why I believe it's really important to be really pragmatic with your transformation. This is not about, doing project management to the millionth degree, right? This is actually about how do you really engage in conversation? How do you think about the communication and the collaboration across the organization? Because have you ever stopped to think about just how unproductive we are when we don't communicate, and it causes all of this conflict and this misalignment, and actually how much of our day is spent on sort of this wasted time, essentially, because we've not been intentional with our communication, for example, and focused on how do we push all of this forward together as one team. I'm a huge believer that actually if we, within an organization, we pulled together as the whole department or division, which we could have a whole separate conversation about the term division. How do we work together for 100% unified purpose? Suddenly great things happen.
So let's talk about. I was intrigued by your chapter 9, which got me to thinking about resistance. Right, resistance exists in an organization, sometimes based on, hey, we've tried that before. I mean, there's a million things that can come up, and we tried that before, it didn't work, or whatever it is. And what effective strategies do you recommend for what you call winning the hearts and minds, winning your transformation, large, small, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, so resistance is a really fascinating area. It was one of the areas where, when I was doing researching, it's just so fascinating to me, learning more about science, the neuroscience, essentially, the science of the brain, and learning more about how we as humans have evolved from cave people, shall we say, and some of the weird intricacies that exist within us that ultimately lead us to find resistance in the modern day world, in particularly change. Fear is such a huge emotion that really drives that resistance, actually. Truly fascinating. So the first piece is to understand what's going on, because when we can start to understand what's going on and why we ourselves are reacting in a particular way, and then why are other people reacting in a particular way, suddenly we can work out how do we do this differently? How do we alter how we're approaching this change? And I think there's so many different elements here that we could dive into as you think about winning your own heart and mind. I use that term quite often. Are you familiar with winning hearts and minds? Does that translate?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
so,
for sure.
I firmly believe that actually
hard to win without it, right?
100%, and that's to the point of measuring transformation. How do we measure hearts and minds, right? We've never traditionally done that. So that's what I wanted to get into in more detail. But actually, really, that all starts with you as an individual, you as the driver of transformation. How do you win your own heart and your own mind? What are the attitudes and the behaviors that you can adopt to encourage that in yourself and then encourage that in others as well?
So your book also talks about the importance of aligning. You've been talking about the importance of aligning the thinking behind the plan. Could you discuss an example, perhaps? Take us into some of your work that flowed into the book where strategic alignment or, not so alignment impacted a retail transformation?
Yeah, certainly. So there's absolutely some great examples, right? And, the chapter is called Aligning the Thinking Behind the Plan. And it's very much, my view is, rather than having a project management plan for box ticking, right? Actually, the plan is a communication tool, and it is a communication tool to say, hey, Michael, here is my prediction of the future. What do you think? And then we can have an open conversation, right? And so many times I've seen this fantastic tool, this plan, as a communication document, essentially, to say, well, look, here's how we're going to play this out. This is what's going to happen. And then suddenly, I'm thinking of some examples, right? Where, here's the plan. We're developing a brand new site and a whole new channel for a company. Here's how it's going to play out, and talking that through with all of these different functional experts, right? And suddenly you get all of the inputs. Well, that's not going to work because of this, and this isn't going to happen because of that. Great. Suddenly we're building up the reasons why this particular plan wouldn't work. But actually, we're also identifying all of the activities that need to happen to get it to work at the same time. And that creates the path forwards, right? That says, right, this is what we need to do to be able to get it to that place. And it would be very easy otherwise to have this misalignment that exists. And, it's a great way of finding out all of the things that, organizations are so complex, right? So many different moving parts. No single person understands it all. But often for a transformation, you need to understand quite a lot of it, right? So actually, how do you open up those conversations to say, tell me what we need to do differently?
Let's turn our minds to the future. So, listen, we've got a lot. It's often said that I'm going to go into the sky versus the road or whatever. The transformations are like, changing the tires on a car going 60 miles an hour, or changing the tires on a flight between two places. That there's always change. Consumers are changing. Technology's changing. How do you see the principles of retail transformation evolving as you think within this maelstrom of change? How do you see it as a constant throughput with your model, that kind of overall engaged model? How do you
so again, that was one of my ideas, was to make the book timeless, right? It would be very easy to write here in 2024, let's write a book and we're going to talk about unified commerce, we're going to talk about AI and everything. Suddenly by 2025, it looks like it's been written 100 years ago, right? So actually what I wanted to do is to create this timeless approach to the how of transformation, that as long as we've still got people in our organizations, then communication, for example, is going to be an important part. Winning hearts and minds, for example, is going to be an important part. There are elements around understanding the business challenge. Now, this is going to be the same whether, if you were to rewind the clock 20, 30, 50 years ago or push it forwards. We shouldn't be transforming if we do not truly understand the challenge or the opportunity that we want to face off and to resolve as an organization. Right. So I hope that the principles of retail transformation stay the same. And then as you apply the what, we're talking about new AI, we're talking about metaverse, whatever other things we're going to be talking about in, let's say, 10 years' time, right? You can still apply them in the same way, is my view.
Super interesting. All right, so I can't have you on the mic. Last couple of questions. Can't have you on the mic without talking about the state of retail in the UK. I mean, you guys drive on the wrong side of the road, and you have these funny things called roundabouts instead of intersections. So there's always differences. Now, the UK came into the Canadian retail context with the sudden bankruptcy and shady dealings, I would say, with the Body Shop wrapping up. They suddenly wrapped up, took all the money out of Canada, bankrupted it, closed the stores. They've shut the U.S. So, of course, the U.K. is foremost in our minds this week. But what's going on in retail in the U.K.? I see high food inflation. I mean, that's kind of a global thing, but you guys are tending towards the higher end of that. You're still, I think, recovering from Brexit and all that. What's the state? What's going on? What's going on?
We're coming at this from this quite a significant period of volatility and uncertainty. You touched on Brexit, that's been happening now for nearly 10 years, right, since that whole conversation started, which for the retail industry is colossal, right? Obviously, all the stuff we know about COVID, the Ukraine crisis and war, cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we're now at a place where we've almost got this, to use our good friend Steve Dennis's term, bifurcation of the retail market, in as much as we've got those companies that are firing on all cylinders, acquiring lots of companies and building these large groups, really large groups, companies like Next and Fraser's Group that really, really sort of mopping up the market, so to speak. And then you've got the other side of the market where some real fundamental challenges that exist. Everything from, increased costs and balancing those. We've just had a significant movement in our government suggested pay guidelines. So suddenly labor for many retailers has shot up quite significant jumps. And we've seen companies investing to stay ahead as the employer of choice and be a preferential place to work because, I get, X pounds more, which is a fantastic approach, right?
Let me ask you about that. Is it the case in the UK that you can't find enough people to work in retail and that any kind of minimum wage is really not really relevant because you can't pay a minimum wage, you won't attract anybody? Is that the situation there?
Well, it's a bit of a yo-yo situation, right? So, again, rewinding a couple of years back to COVID times, that was absolutely a real challenge where, e-commerce warehouses were really striving for people on every front because suddenly everyone wants it, right? We're also at a place where high street vacancy rates and sort of physical stores have been arguably emptier than they've ever been, but where you've got large stores doing really well, supermarkets in particular, companies like I say, Next and Fraser's Group, as I mentioned earlier, IKEA doing really well. So really,
are the hard discounters making an input? The Aldi and Lidls of the world?
100% they are, and we've also got a whole sort of group of discounters across different categories as well. So yeah, they are absolutely doing very well, but it's really interesting. Certainly in the supermarket sector, in the grocery sector, we've got a real fight back. Of course, on price, but also on propositions as well. So it was, again, a few years ago, we had this place where Aldi was doing superb prices, but winning a lot of the taste tests for products. And people were very surprised at the quality of it. And we're now seeing more and more companies really stepping up their product quality as well as investing in price. So it's boy, oh boy, is it a fierce market out there. Yeah. Really fierce.
Yeah. Steve, you mentioned Steve. Steve and I just interviewed Michael Ward from Harrods, actually, for the Remarkable Retail podcast. And we were struck by the same thing. I mean, he's talking about how excited he was to open up the new Oeuvre-le-Coute or Morton Chandon champagne room. And you look at it and you're like, wow, talk about bifurcation. And it's doing really well, right? And as you said, the larger enterprises do well, and they kind of overinvest in the, I don't know, I guess that's accessible luxury or even more luxury. So it is really it's a fascinating market. What do you think this year, 2024? You going to see some growth in the retail sector, or what do you think? We're thinking here low single digits. I mean, taking out a bit of inflation, which is mostly on the food side. Is that where you guys think you're going to wind up?
I think if you average it out as an overall industry, yes, I agree. I think actually, if you look in the detail of the data, I think you'll see some companies that are really surging ahead, as we've just been speaking about, and some companies, flat would be wonderful. Unfortunately,
flat would be the new up for them. Yeah. And then companies like the Body Shop, right? I mean, what a transformation! What a transformational retailer 20 years ago. But to your point, I mean, really getting back to our discussion, kind of watched the last 15, 20 years happen to them, and everybody kind of picked up on the same things.
It's a challenge. So that particular brand has been, had these superb roots, right? Very ahead of its time, actually.
Very.
And actually, it's been passed around different companies over the past few years, and each of those companies is going to have its own strategic vision for where they want to take that, and it's worked out or not worked out, whichever way you want to play it. And actually, now we've kind of been left with actually a brand that has lost. You can't just go out there as a beauty brand and say, "Oh, we're sustainable." That's not enough anymore, right?
Yeah. It feels like the vision picking up on the whole theme is strip it for parts at this point. Right?
Unfortunately, but for me, the brand, the Body Shop, has still got such a huge reputation to feed off. So I'm really hopeful that actually there will be a solution that says, actually, let's bring the Body Shop back. Let's get back to the heritage and actually amp it up a bit more, right? Yeah. How do we do that? And then, as an organization in its new lean format, after it's gone through the various administrative processes, how do we actually make that happen? Because again, having a customer proposition is one thing, having a business model is another, but actually, how do you build the operating model that ties those two things together to say this is realistic and viable and can be consistently deployed?
Well, my recommendation to the folks, if they're listening today from the Body Shop or wherever the hell owns it now, buy your book, buy Oliver Banks' book, and that will be your roadmap to turning that business around. Oliver, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, learn more, find out more, where do they go and how do they get in touch?
Yeah, so probably the best place is find me on LinkedIn. My name is Oliver Banks. I've got a little green circle around my profile picture, so you know it's me. Or find out more about the book at drivingretailtransformation.com.
Fantastic. Well, such a treat to get you on the mic. Doesn't happen often enough. I hope we get to see each other, perhaps in Barcelona at Shop Talk. We might cross paths there, but whatever.
Indeed.
It's been a treat to get you on the mic. Congratulations again on the book, and I wish you continued success in everything you do and safe travels. And thanks for joining me on the pod.
It's always a pleasure, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. What an awesome conversation.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure to check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global eCommerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker, and Rethink Retail 2023 Global Top Retail Influencer. If you want more information, content, or to chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.